Okay, we're gonna start tinkering with the hydraulic system. I got some vintage tractor hydraulic fluid. It's pretty cheap. It's got less wear additives, which for older machines is usually a safe bet. So we're just gonna pour 5 gallons of that in, but first we're gonna reach in here and see if we can fish out this filter that's sitting at the bottom of this reservoir, and plug that back onto the intake pipe, because I think it's generally a good idea to have your hydraulic oil filtered. Oh, there it goes. Nice. Okay. Now we're going to fill this up, hopefully until it mostly covers that filter, completely submerges the intake pipe. Alright, and let's crack open this hydraulic fluid. Pull out in there. Now, probably be wise to play it safe and have a funnel here. Now, this would actually make a lot better of a funnel. I had it kicking around from some other job. Full of 52-100 bearings. Let's wipe this guy out. See if we can use this. Alright, I'm going to put this guy up on here. There. Handle over here just in case. Another thing that we could do was just pour it into this for a while, and then just pour it out of this into there. Let's try that. Yeah, that seems the most controllable. Poor shizzle. I like that this thing isn't pouring just set on its side. Let's have a look. Okay. So, a lot more full. Filter's poking out a little still, but the intake's definitely all the way submerged. I'll bet that's all it's designed to hold, because much more and that hose back there will be partly submerged. I mean, it's not a big pump. I doubt it has a big flow rate. So let's switch this thing on and see if we get any hydraulic oil being sucked up now. One thing I noticed was that the hydraulic piston here has a little bit of rust on it. Nothing too major, but I am going to steel wool it off real quick. because, you know, it's a small preventative measure to take to reduce any damage to the seals we might cause by dragging that through them. Yeah, that's already way better. Okay, now let's go fire it up. Okay, well, here goes. Let's try the spindle first. So that should be picking up hydraulic oil. Pump motor is spinning. Nothing much happening in there though. I feel like I can hear it trying to suck up oil a little bit. Perhaps the pump needs priming because it was empty? Not sure about that. The manual isn't really clear about what any of this does. It doesn't show this panel configuration. As far as that goes, you know, what changes, what doesn't. And so far this ain't doing nothing. But it's locked out at the moment. Okay, we're going to stop this and we're going to look into can we prime that pump. Okay, so this pump is not producing any suction to take up oil out of the reservoir. And I've tried a few things to no avail yet. So now what I'm going to do is try priming the pump. Yes, it's a gear pump. Technically they don't need priming. In practicality, priming can sometimes help them, particularly if they're somewhat worn. Just the gears being wet and the case being wet can provide a little bit of sealing. And help them start to take up fluid. So we're going to try to effectively increase the head at the pump intake here. Bye. Whew. Yeah, that oil is cold today. Where is the pump intake? There it is. We got this. A length of plastic tube to slip over the end of the intake. And then I'll fill it up some to get fluid in the intake, basically above the level of the actual pump. So it should gravity feed at least some fluid down into the pump. I get this to slip over there. And I think I gotta enlarge it a little bit more. But I've effectively increased the ID of the tube a little bit, by putting it on the horn of the anvil and cross peening around it to stretch it. So I'll do that a little bit more here. I believe I'll wear a glove this time. I don't particularly enjoy reaching into that chilly, disgusting oil, but hopefully this will fit significantly better. Let's see here. Also, did I turn the power on? Yeah, it's on. All right. Okay. There's the oil intake. Come on, fit on there. Yeah, that fits now. I do believe, sort of, don't want it popping off. Or rather, we probably do want it popping off rather quickly, but only if the pump starts sucking oil, then I'll yank it off of there. I've also cracked the pressure line on the other side of the pump, just in case. That'll help it prime, not having to actually build any pressure on that side. Then if it starts sucking up fluid hard out of the intake, I'll have to run over there and close that real quick before it sprays oil freaking everywhere. Alright, so now I'll fill this up with this bottle. Prime the pump. I'll just dip this cup into the oil here. Fill this tube up to prime the pump. I'll turn the pump on and see what happens. I would really prefer it if this pump was not shot. Okay, I think that's sort of full. Come on. Well, that sounds good. Ugh. Let's get this oil off of my hand real quick. Okay, dude. Well, that's definitely good. Tighten this fitting. Alright. That fitting's tight. Get rid of this plug. Yeah. Let's see if we can make this thing shoot around how we want. Well, would you look at that? Triumph! Well, that's moving back and forth just as nice as you please. Spinning, table's chooching. Oh, weird. try to figure out what the deal is with this thing. I want a slow cross. Come on. Oh. It crossfed once. Oh, dude, is that thing glitchy or what? I'm gonna have to figure that out. Let's turn the speed up. That didn't seem to have any effect on the speed of travel. Maybe it will when the oil warms up some. After all, the oil is lubricating the tableways as well as working as the hydraulic fluid. So it could be that as the oil warms up, everything will start working better on this. Right now, turning this knob doesn't seem to have a major effect on the speed of the table actuation, which is what it should be doing, affecting the travel speed. But we are chooching. That is major. I mean, that pretty much means that we could grind more or less now if we wanted to. Increase the table travel. Whoops. Jeez. Did it go past it? Huh. I'll have to figure that out. Now we're going to have to go through the hydraulics and fix them. But the pump isn't trashed. That, I would say, is the important thing here. So the mag chuck works, and the table works more or less. The spindle works. The up and down and the in and out more or less work. I like that. So let's keep building. Let's start building the tracking tower. Okay, so starting in on the tracking and tension arm, it's going to mount to this pad up here that the automatic wheel dresser used to mount to. And we're going to get some 1/2-inch plate up here. So I'm going to leave it this wide, and I'm going to trim some of the length off so it's not overhanging this wheel. Probably trim it back nearly flush with that. So it's kind of overhanging into this area, and that'll be about where the actual arm is welded onto the mounting, the bolt-on pad.
And then this puts the bolts away, back away a little bit from where the arm needs to weld on. So that'll be a nice offset for it. I'm going to use 4 of these 5 holes up here, and they are a 7/16 coarse thread. So we're just going to drill 4 7/16 holes in that pad, shorten it a little bit, and get it ready for bolting on here with some lock washers. That'll be the base plate for our grinding arm. All right, so I don't have screw-in center punch points for a 7/16, so I just measured it all here, laid it out. And actually, 3 of these holes annoyingly are square to each other, and then these spaces and these spaces are the same, but this space and this space are different. This hole wanders out that way by like 3/16 of an inch. I got it all measured, so now we're just going to do some center punching here. Magnetic scribe stuck to my button. It's pretty funny. And then we'll also saw the end of this off, so let me go mark that. That. Now it's off to the belt grinder. Okay, here we're preparing to weld the tracking arm receiver So I usually shim with paper just so that I don't get the receiver shrunk too tightly from the weld or clamped too tightly when I weld it onto I need to be able to slip it off of the arm here after welding. So the paper allows me some clearance to knock it back apart. This is just regular printer paper from some of my pantograph pattern printouts. So I have 2" by 1/4 by a foot that I'm setting this all on top of, and sides here of 1.5" by 1/4 by a foot. So it's a square fabricated 2" outside, 1.5" inside socket, fabricated together for a slip fit on this 1.5" square tube. I do it this way because it's a lot harder to find square tube that fits concentric to other square tube, and then you still got to mess with removing the welding seam from the inside of the tube if you want a nice slip fit. With this, I just am fabricating a box, and I can make it fit however I want. Lot easier than finding concentric tube. Whoopsie. I'll clamp down. First clamp is the hardest. So get everything lightly snugged here. And I'm not gonna like weld this together super hard. I'm not running these clamps super tight. I'm just running them lightly snug, because after all, I mean, I put the paper in there because I don't want it overly tight. So it would be counterproductive of me now to run the clamps overly tight. So with a little clamp pressure on it, then I can tap pieces around to kind of line up how I want in the clamps. Just a light squeeze here. Just enough to snug it up to the tube, and you'll see I put paper only around 2 sides of the tube because I don't need a double paper clearance. Then I don't want this tube to rattle inside of this socket. I just want a nice smooth slip fit. So that's going to be enough. Now we're going to tack it lightly. I'm not going to fully weld everything. Again, that's just going to shrink and warp too much. I'm just going to do, you know, inch weld, inch weld, inch welds, and spaced apart pretty well, and that'll be strong enough and it won't shrink up on there. All the more welding it's going to get. Now what I need to do is immediately knock this tube out of here while everything's still hot. Okay, we're going to have to go to a vise here. Let's try to use this thing. that's a workout. I need to be taller. And I need a more effective hammer. Let's try this. Now we're talking. Wait. And we're there. Okay. So our paper is out. Now we'll just grind the inner tube a little. Okay, the socket is finished welded for the arm receiver. Ground it a little bit, wire brushed it off, and then I ground the arm smoother on every face. Didn't take a ton of material off, I just ground it and checked it until it slid in there just nicely. And it'll hit the bottom, but very little play in that fit up, even if you come up to the top of it here. That's what you want, very little rattle or play. It needs to be stable. Then I tacked a heavy washer to the bottom here so that when I drop a spring in there later, it'll have something to sit on. And then I can push against it for tension on the belt. So this is the nuts and bolts, so to speak, of the entire attachment is this socket, arm, spring fit up here. And then this can be trimmed for angle, this can be trimmed for length. We weld this to the pad that we've mounted on the grinder, and then we bore the top of this for the tracking assembly. But that's good for now. Then we'll start making our tracking assembly. Okay, so here's the parts that I have for the tracking assembly. These pieces are 2.5 long. They're 3/8 thick, 1.5 inch wide, 2.5 long. They have a 3/8 hole drilled centered this way and 3/4 in from that end. I've just rounded these off. And then I have chamfered the insides of these right here on the plain end. Then this is 4 inches, 1.5 inches, and 3/8. It's from the same stock. And it's got a 3/8, well, 5/16 drill, 3/8 tapped coarse, hole centered 3/4 from the end and equally from each side, so 3/4 all the way around. And then a 1/2 inch hole that's not threaded, drilled 3/4 inch in from this end. And then I've chamfered it here and here because we're going to be doing a weld like that, and we want that weld to be pretty strong. So now we'll get a bolt involved and also the 1.5 inch tube of the actual arm. So I'm cutting the head off of a bolt. Here's one way I like to do stuff like that, is the collet block with a 1/2 inch 5C collet. You can stick the bolt out just enough to where it'll cut it, put it in the vise, and then on the back side of the vise I have it shimmed out so the vise grabs pretty even. And that way the bolt won't spin when I cut it. Easy peasy. Okay, why is that bolt cut to a certain length? So I cut the head off the bolt so it can go through the 4-inch plate. I've countersunk the 4-inch plate on the back side with a 3/4 inch drill bit, about an 1/8 inch deep, to give some room for that plug weld to exist. And I've taken the wheel, put a washer on it, stubbed the axle through where it comes out just past flush with the top of this plate with a nut on this side. And plenty of threads here for adjustment. I'm going to leave that assembly together, set it here on the bench. I'm going to run my ground clamp directly to the steel tab here so that I'm not passing electricity through these bearings, because that's not good for them. But so that all this assembly is held to where this shaft can't really go out sideways from the weld. And then I'll tack that together. Both sides. And then I'll do the weld. Nice round plug weld on there. And that should be easily strong enough for that wheel to live on there, or for that axle to live on there forever. Now we have the axle welded on relatively square to the axle pad. Now we have a very small clearance for the back of our wheel for a washer to exist there. So that's all as it needs to be. Now we can work on getting this weld. That's just going to entail welding those dudes on there like that. But that needs to be clamped around the tube, and the tube needs to have a hole drilled in it first. Okay, here's how you got to set up for this weld. So we have a 3/8 pivot bolt. It's got a flat washer. We're going to come along. We're going to put that through one ear. The chamfer is on the inside. We're going to run this through. We've got a paper washer. Again, just so these don't squeeze on it too much from weld shrinkage. We need a nice, clean, tight but not too tight fit. Okay. Again, weld chamfer on the inside. Another washer. Snug that all up with a nut. Later it gets a nylock. Right now it just gets a regular old nut. We're going to bring 5/8 worth of shim material over here next to the assembly. We're going to set this on that. And we are going to run it up to where it is. These are centered on this lengthways. Then we're going to get that weld. Let me grab my mask. And a glove. And we need to be grounded to the table this time. Let's go. Right, like that. So these need to be flush across. That's the purpose of the shims. First, then weld. And we're good. Now while that's still hot, let's run that nut off of there. Take the pivot axle out. And see if we can get this off of that. Actually, let's let it cool like that. So the weld shrinkage finishes up with it still shimmed out. Okay, this is cooled off. I took the paper spacer out, put this back together with washers and a nylock this time. So how this goes together, you can just put however many washers you want on here to space the wheel in or out. And then I left enough threads when we plug welded that I have room to put quite a few spacers in if I wanted, or run it tight with less spacers. We're just going to run that down there temporarily for now. So that pivots like that. And then we get a ring bolt. This is just an expedient way of doing this. You could use whatever kind of handle you want. Forge something, I don't care. That could be cool. I'll scrape the rest of that label off later. So we're going to run the ring bolt nut. We're going to run the nut up the bolt some. Okay, and then we're going to put it through the threaded hole back here, 3/8 threaded hole, and this nut just serves as a lock nut for when you get an adjustment you like. You can just run the nut up to that plate as a jam nut and just leave it set that way. That's what I usually do. I very rarely have to adjust the tracking on my idler once I get it tracking pretty good. Even when I change belts, it doesn't really need too much. So this just gives you something to grab. It's a handle. And then we'll just run that down for now. So we'll take this over to the grinder now. And we have this. So you can see it'll adjust the tracking now. It pivots on there. So that's good to go. Now we just need to tack the receiver onto the base plate on the grinder, and then fit this up to the receiver for length with the spring. Okay, over here at the receiver, we went about a 15 degree angle over from vertical. If you get a little bit, it gives you a little bit more belt wrap on the leading edge of the wheel before the belt hits the work, so that makes it track a little more stably. It throws sparks off to the side a little bit so they don't fall right back down on your machine. It also will effectively, as the top tracking wheel kind of rolls over this way as the angle comes down, it gets a little easier to reach. That would of course be more true if the angle came over a lot, which you'll see on my other surface grinder. My tracking arm is more angled off to the side. On this one, we don't have much of an offset available with the width of this plate since we're not clamping around the spindle. So we're just offsetting this to the edge of the plate, like so. And we are taking the little machinist square, we're squaring it up in the back here, making sure it's not going to be at some kind of a funky angle there. So it's going to sit just about like that. We're hanging the edge off just a little bit, and we'll throw some weld up under here, but we're just going to get it tacked down for now. So again, I'm going to ground directly to this because we don't need to be screwing up the bearings in our surface grinder. I'm also going to see if I can shield this with a welding glove. I mean, the spatter won't really stick to aluminum, but I don't really want to mar it. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's see if this wants to do better at this angle. Yeah, that's better. Okay, let's get that tacked on. And when you tack this on, it needs to be not only square to the base plate, but it needs to not be turned at all. So another way of saying that is the face of the contact wheel here and the face of this should be coplanar. This can't be rotated to it. Which is a difficult thing to check here. I can actually use this side of it and then that edge of the plate. So let's just get a tack on there. Where's my stinger at? Tack on this side and a tack on the back. And then we'll take it off of the machine to do the weld all the way. Okay, this is cooled off enough. We're taking the long view so you guys can see what I'm actually doing. That tripod you're on isn't particularly tall. Alright, let's put some bolts in. This dude's sitting on here, how it goes. Snug it down a little bit. I'm being careful of these threads because I feel like they can these threads are a little bit loose and are in cast iron, so you don't need to be reefing this down a lot. So I'm going to find some lock washers the right size here. I had some, but they're the wrong size. But lock washers will help me not have to reef it down grim tight, and they'll keep the bolts from turning out. Okay, so that's good. Let's grab our tower. We'll set it down in there. It's going to be too long at first, or at least it ought to be. We'll see. Oh yeah, by a fair bit. And that is not a problem. I just make it all, so I jumped the gun when I welded the washer on the end of the tube. What I tend to do is just leave the tube run out a bit long, intentionally do all this work up to this point, so I can find what length the tube wants to be, and then just chop it off when I get it spaced with a grinding belt on here. So we're going to need to cut at least 2 inches off of it, but we don't even have the spring in there yet. So let's get a spring involved. That ought to really change things. Okay. So this spring under full compression. Let's measure the difference there. Yeah, it's about 1.5 inches travel on that spring. So we'll keep that in mind. So let's see how much we would have to cut off. Now, we have to cut off about 6 inches there. But then we'll subtract this 1.5 inches. We'll go cut off 4.5 inches real quick on the bandsaw, and then we'll see if we can get belt tension on it yet. You know, one other thing I've done, this will actually probably help the fitment be easier. So cutting the end of this tube off, the washer is now gone. So unfortunately the spring will go into the end of this. So I can't really get a meaningful push against the spring for the fit. So I do need something in the top here, but it's better if it's not as permanent as welded on. So this is a washer just with a bolt. This will go in here, and that'll just help me push on the spring, is the idea. So main thing, I think we'll want to let it down in there kind of slowly, rather than all just fall at once. Okay, now let's see. Okay, that seems good. You don't want to take too much off at once. You want to just take enough off to where you can get, you need mean belt tension on these things. Ooh, and that's what we've got there. Mean belt tension. So now we can track it a little bit. But if it looks like our tracking is about even there. It's not steered any particular way, and we're still off of that. So I'm just gonna take a couple of those washers off, and that'll just align it'll bring the entire tracking wheel back toward the frame some. And then let's put the wheel back on. Where did I put it? Did you guys see where I just put that wheel? Dummy, you put it back on there. This kind of stuff happens all the time. Okay, let's try that. We'll see if that wants to track. You should have to yank on it pretty damn hard to get the belt on. Ah, yes, that alignment is better.
Let's see if we can get it to steer toward the machine more. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Let me clear this chuck off. We'll get a 36 grit belt on here. We'll actually try a grind real quick. Okay guys, I have a piece of Crew Forge B here that I forged flat for some San Mai that I do need to surface grind. So let me just mag that down. That is good and magged. We'll fire the spindle up, we'll get the table chooching, and we'll have a grind at this thing. Slow today. Okay, we'll make it start. And the table is slow with that cold oil. I'm trying though. We're at 25, now we're at 35, so this is a 10-thou cut coming up. Yeah, we're at 10-thou double cut. 120-thou step over. That's no problem. Let's try to shorten the team step over. Oh. It won't step over. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's a big step over. That's probably 200 thou there. We'll bump it again. 120 depth. Probably 250 step over there. That's probably a 3/8 step over. Oh. That does amazingly well. Let's let the workings go here. And the spindle off, chuck off. Great success. Love that. So we're going to put a nylock on there so that doesn't wander. Tracking mechanism works good. Tension is good and stiff. No wobble here. Nice and true. Bolted hard to the machine. And
yeah, 36 grit belt, 10 thou, no problem. This belt is super worn out too, so couldn't be happier with that.
Thanks for watching, and stay tuned please for the final chapter.